Today we're going to talk about the causes and culprits of the housing crisis. Before COVID, ACE was already fighting for housing justice throughout the state of California. But COVID has amplified the need for safe, secure, and affordable housing. It's important that we not only fight to save the existing spaces where we live, but we have to push a little further so that we change the entire landscape of what it means to have access to safe and affordable housing. So one of the things that we have to do as organizers when we're attempting to change conditions is look at how we got here in the first place. First of all, what does it mean to be housing secure? Peace of mind, not worrying every day whether I will be able to afford my housing. Under your control, securing a roof, not just for me, but for my whole family. You can afford it, no harassment. You don't have to worry about your health. Those are all amazing and very true answers. And I think it's important that we go back to some of our founding fathers to hear about what they thought about housing security. When this country was coming together as formed by the United States, not by the native indigenous people who stewarded the land before being colonized. The founding fathers who actually stole land from the people living here said this when they were building the country. An agrarian law would take place if the masses had control. And if we observe the government needs to protect the interest of landholders against the agrarians. The agrarians were the farm workers. The founding fathers tried to enslave indigenous people, but because they knew the land, they understood it, they were able to escape very easily. And they also died of the illnesses that the colonists brought over. They started to bring enslaved people because they weren't slaves. They brought enslaved people to work the land. And so then after that, if the colonists start acquiring wealth, they said, we have to create a government that is positioned to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. Who is the majority in these Americas? The First Nations people and Africans started to outnumber the colonists. And you know who else added to the majority? Poor whites. And the reason I bring that up today is because that is the very same condition that we are living in right now, where Black, brown, and poor people outnumber the opulent minority. And the opulent minority is the one who are the individuals who control the land. During COVID, the wealth of the 1%, and now it's a fraction of the 1%, has grown exponentially. And they are the ones who are controlling the land and our access to affordable housing. But the one thing that is true about all of that is the power of the majority. And that's why laws in our government was created in ways that protect the opulent minority against the majority. But what we have is our numbers. And like we say at ACE, there is power in numbers. And what we choose to do with that power will determine in these times, post-COVID, what we can achieve. But what are some things that we can do to transform our existing dynamic with landholders, with landlords, with the governments who are creating policy that make it difficult for us to access affordable housing? And what are we aiming for? So if we know that the majority of the land is owned by speculators, what do we need to do in order to change the dynamic, and what are we changing it to? And I'm going to ask Leilani, what can we do in this moment around shifting the existing dynamics around land ownership so that it is more accessible or completely accessible to the people.
I just want to underscore what Carroll said about what's happened during this pandemic. In California, you're feeling it acutely. The rich have gotten richer and the poor have gotten poorer. And on a global scale, I can tell you that every 17 hours during the pandemic, a new billionaire was created every 17 hours. And so within that same 1 year period, 150 million people will fall into, have fallen and will fall into extreme poverty. That is living on less than $1.65 a day. I do think that we have to be very clear that it is a series of government laws that have created the crisis that you find yourselves in. It is both the failure to enact good tenant protections, so the failure to do good law to protect tenants, things like rent caps, or rent control, I think you refer to it as, which does not exist across the state of California in every city and every jurisdiction. I think some have pieces and bits and pieces of it, but it doesn't exist across the state. And it certainly isn't a nationwide thing. And the rent control is just one tenant protection that's necessary. There could be a whole plethora of others that we could talk about, like there could be long-term leases. Your definition of security was so fantastic, right? Not wanting to fear that, any minute you could lose your home, not wanting to fear that your income is just simply not enough because the rent is too damn high. We have to change that, and we can change that through tenant protection laws. In other jurisdictions, in Spain, for example, there are 5 to 7 year leases. So you're not looking at this 1 year, every year, or month by month. You're locked in, and you're locked into a reasonable rent that can only be increased by a reasonable amount, sometimes just to the rate of inflation year after year. Wouldn't that be nice? But there's more than just the tenant protections. There are laws that really advantage those big actors, the big private equity firms that you are all too familiar with in California, who have really invaded your housing landscape, the Blackstones. And those actors are given huge preferential tax treatment and tax benefits to be able to do what they do. Don't think that they're not making not just money off of your homes. They're making money off of finance itself and the way finance is governed and regulated through law. And so, they pay cheap on the dollar, they buy things cheap, they get cheap debt. Blackstone is back on the prowl. I listened to an interview with Jonathan Gray, who really has masterminded their real estate strategy. And he said, he was asked specifically, okay, what are you guys looking at right now in terms of purchasing? What shopping spree are you going on next? And he said, we continue to remain very interested in rental housing, single and multi-family rental housing. So that's a warning.
Tara, what is a model that we could be shooting for right now that would completely change our understanding of and relationship to being housed?
In one hat, I organize with KC Tenants here in Kansas City. We're a grassroots member-led organization, very similar to ACE and organizing around similar things. In another, I run the Homes Guarantee campaign at a national organization called People's Action. And we had a similar conversation to this one about almost 4 years ago with our leaders, where we were talking about what kind of campaign we wanted to run. And at that meeting, our leaders said to us, we can't pick a little issue cut. This problem that we're living within is so big and so complicated, and we don't actually understand what the long-term agenda is yet, right? We understand pieces of it, but we don't know what we mean when we get into the streets and we chant housing is a human right. We actually don't know what that would look like in America because our imagination has been limited by what I like to call a conspiracy of the profiteers, right? They benefit from us not dreaming, from us not imagining. So we set out on a years-long project of imagining what would the world look like if we were in charge, right? If we had the power, if we determined what our lives should be in this world. And what our leaders came up with was this vision for a homes guarantee. And it's very related to exactly what Carroll and Leilani were talking about. It's this notion, very simple, that we live in the richest country in the history of the world. We can and we must guarantee that everyone has a home, period. Simple, right? Very complicated in a world where these profiteers rule everything around us, right? But just to dig in, the policy of the homes guarantee that we've envisioned includes 12 million units of social housing. That would be housing that's off of the private market. It's not available for speculation by the Blackstones of the world, and it's controlled by our communities, right? That's social housing. There's a piece that's about public housing. We've actually made massive investments in public housing in this country in the last century, and then we completely neglected them and disinvested from them. And by the way, that wasn't an accident, right? We disinvested from that housing right when Black and brown families became the majority residents of public housing, right? So it's all connected to this story that Carroll just told you about racial capitalism in this country. And that was a concerted effort to make sure that the public system failed so that the private system felt like the only option so that the rich people at the top could continue making their money, right? So the homes guarantee says, let's invest in the existing public housing and let's actually expand it. It's currently illegal to build more public housing in the United States. Let me say that again. It is currently illegal, and it has been for 20 years, to build more public housing in the US. Obviously, that needs to change, right? We also want to win a national tenants bill of rights. As you all know, because you've been on the cutting edge of these fights in California, we are fighting for the bare minimum in the local space, statewide, for these tenant protections. We are organizing for a national tenants bill of rights, and not just rights, but also what are the structures we need to protect and enforce those rights, right? We have a vision for tenants having their rights protected, like in the last century, workers had their rights protected with federally sort of established structures that allowed for collective bargaining. So National Tenants Bill of Rights. Then, of course, we have a vision to end speculation. We want the Blackstones of the world to be put out of business and not be able to make money off of commodifying our homes. And then this is critical because I think it's very connected to what Carroll described as the kind of cause of the problem. We don't believe that we can actually start this vision in 2021, ignoring the centuries of harm that has led to the circumstance of today. That a homes guarantee must include a vision for reparations. It won't be the whole vision for what reparations in this country needs to look like, but it must include a reparative agenda to account for the fact that we can't start from today and pretend like all this bad stuff didn't happen, right? And then finally, Leilani touched on this, but a homes guarantee, as we see it, needs to be not just a demand of the housing movement, but a demand across our movements, because the housing crisis is the climate crisis. These aren't separate issues, right? These are deeply connected issues. The majority reason globally that people are displaced is because of climate change. So climate change and gentrification, the commodification of our homes, these are all forces of evil that work against us. And the same communities are the most disproportionately impacted by all of these. So all of this is to say we have this bold vision for the homes guarantee, a world in which we all have a safe, accessible, truly affordable home. The way we get there is through the organizing that you all do at ACE, that we do at KC Tenants. We talk about this a lot. Organizing is about meeting people where they're at, imagining a different way forward, translating personal pain and struggle into public and collective power. If I had it my way, we would have like 50,000 organizations that look like ACE all over this country. And that is when we will have the power that we need to actually win the world of homes guarantee. It's not going to be tomorrow, but the good news is you all are doing the work today so that we can do tomorrow what we cannot do today.
And so I'm asking this question to both of you because organizing is key in how we transform our current existence. but what are some steps that we as organized residents throughout the state of California can do right now in this particular moment to move towards that homes guarantee? What are some things that we should be thinking about? What are some things we should be pushing on?
At KC Tenants, one thing that we're focused on right now is a renewed kind of rigor around our base building. And what I mean by that is that Kansas City is a very different city, maybe from some of yours, right? It's certainly not like a Los Angeles. There's a number of tenants who live in Kansas City, and that's not actually a massive number, right? It's a big number. It's not a massive number. It's about 200,000 tenants who live in the city of Kansas City, right? Of course, many, many more in the metro area and surrounding areas. We have set a goal in our organization of engaging every single tenant in Kansas City within the next year through some kind of engagement, whether that's knocking on their door, calling them on the phone, texting them, with the attempt to organize them into our base. What we want to be able to say in a couple years is we have 10%, 20%, 40%. We have 80% of the tenants in this city organized into a union, because we know that the other side wins as long as we are not organized. There are actually more of us than there are them, right? But the more formal and rigorous our organizing can be, the more collective power we can build, then the more power we have over them, the more protection our people have, the less we need the kind of violent state-sanctioned protections that they give us in the form of policing and stuff like that, right? But that's all contingent on our ability to do really deep, rigorous base building. So that's one place where we're putting a lot of energy right now. Another place is on running campaigns that have this more like North Star long-term agenda orientation. And what I mean by this is that, especially on an issue like housing, there's a lot of stuff that's proposed that we could be organizing around today that sounds like it's good, but it might actually entrench us in this world that we don't like, right? An example of this, I think, is that, nationally, folks are working on campaigns to win a universal voucher. That sounds good, right? More money for housing. On the other hand, if we just pour money into the housing market as it currently exists, all of that voucher money goes to subsidize the industry that is profiting off of our homes, right? So on one hand, we might win some material victories for our people, but what entrenchment are we doing to make sure that we never actually get out of this world in which housing is treated as commodity? So we're kind of pivoting the way we campaign to think about what are stepping stones that we can win today that will actually take us in the direction of a homes guarantee rather than take us in the opposite direction. We've seen massive investments in housing in the last year through the stimulus, right? Massive amounts of money, $25 billion is the recent number from the last stimulus bill, going basically straight into the pockets of a lot of these corporate slumlords, right? That ain't right. So what are we going to do about it? We're going to imagine over the course of the summer what a tenants bill of rights looks like, and not just a tenants bill of rights, but also those structures to enforce and protect those tenants' rights in a really formal sense, right? What would it look like if there was a federally guaranteed right that tenants who organized in a union in their building could collectively bargain with their property owner?
Some things that really stood out for me are, number one, the fact that we need to organize, right? ACE, that's what we do. But we need to get everyone on this call that's an ACE member to become just exponentially more hardcore organizer, to reach out to your friends and your family, because we need more numbers. We need more of us fighting for the things that Tara is talking about. And number two, the reason I started with the racial makeup of this country is because racial capitalism is one of the ways that we continue to be impacted by a small group of people who are determining the outcomes of our lives. And it was the same then and it is as it is now. And there are more of us than them. And that's one of the things that they fear. What could social housing do to change our relationship with housing as we currently know it? And I want to just leave with this example. There was just another case in the Bay Area in Berkeley where Wedgwood was going to evict a long-term working class woman in public education from the home that she'd been living in for many, many years. And so there was this fight to save her home. And they did it, which is a victory. But in 3 weeks, people had to raise $600,000. If we have to come up with over $500,000 every time we want to wrestle a residence away from a speculator, we are not winning. We are not winning. So how can social housing help us change those dynamics? We're not dealing here with any false understanding that somehow any of these agencies are going to save us without action, without direct action, and without pushing. So let's be clear. We know who we're dealing with, even with the president. I actually helped to draft the Democratic National Platform for the next 4 years for this country. And I issued my clause on housing as a human right, and with some language that, you know, ACE would love. And they turned it down. They said no, they didn't want to have that in there. But that's fine. We're going to push because that's how we're going to win.